Zimbabwe muri kuzviona sei. Oh, shall remain. Yours truly miss a one blow. Foolish government. Yeah, me raspi. Urumende yema geva, akatumira mbava. Urumende yema geva, tiri kutongwa netoti. Yemesonuri geva, takatumira mbava geva. Matoti, urumende yembava, tiri kutongwa negeva mbava. Toti, takatumira. From bad to worse, tishiva kuna baba bona.
For many of you that follow Zimbabwean social media, you've heard this story that Rutendo Matinyarare, the Zanu-PF apologist, has turned his back on Zanu-PF and is fighting with the government of Zimbabwe. There have even been reasons that have been given that he's bitter that he was not given a position, and some are even saying that I am a CIA agent. Well, I'm here to set the record straight. First and foremost, I've never been a member of Zanu-PF. Number two, I've never been a Zanu-PF apologist. What I have been is a brand architect, a communication specialist that is trying to revive the image of Zimbabwe by telling the good Zimbabwe story. Because everything about Zimbabwe has been negative to the point of giving Zimbabwe a negative stereotype and a negative image, I decided to do the opposite, telling the good story, showing stories that are not told about Zimbabwe, the productivity, the good stories of brilliant business people that we have in the country, the rise of the country, and the industrialization that is taking place to make Zimbabwe attractive for investors once again, and to also start bringing tourists back. I was also fighting this negative sentiment because it was part and parcel of the reason why Zimbabwe was under sanctions that were supported by many people in the world, until we began to tell the other side of the story that then got to see people rallying with us to fight against those sanctions that were removed 2 years ago. The removal of those sanctions has benefited the Zimbabwean people, and it has also begun to benefit SADC. So where is it that I have had a difference with Zanu-PF to the extent that people think I've turned my back on Zanu-PF? My difference with Zanu-PF has been in the debate of a constitutional amendment that we are all debating in Zimbabwe in the 90-day period in which we're supposed to review whether we want this constitutional amendment and to give our thoughts. I simply gave my thoughts on this constitutional amendment and how I felt, and that's where people thought I had a difference with Zanu-PF. So what is it that I differ with Zanu-PF so much about that made people think that we have had a fallout? Well, Zanu-PF wants to change the constitution of Zimbabwe, and in this amendment, there's 90 days in which their proposal has been put to the public, and we are giving our public commentary. I have given my public commentary about the things that I'm not happy about in this amendment and the process through which the amendment is currently going. So what are the fundamental issues that I did not like about this amendment and how it's going? So one of the first problems that I have with this amendment is what it seeks to achieve. In clause 2, it says, the amendment establishes a parliamentary method of selecting a president. It specifies that the candidate must secure majority votes, and if no one achieves absolute majority, a runoff is held. The process is overseen by a Chief Justice and designate judge, but the crux of the matter is they want Parliament to select the president instead of us, the people, electing the president that we want. This is very dangerous in a country like Zimbabwe that has got a lot of corruption, and more importantly, where our parliament is one of the least paid parliaments in the world. So our parliamentarians oftentimes are hungry. They oftentimes rent-seeking. They do not have time to make policies and laws. That's why you see we hardly make laws, because they're always looking for ways to feed their families. This renders them open to be bribed. So when we then begin to have a very wealthy elite, they can begin to bribe our parliamentarians to put into presidency anybody that has been elected among the parliamentarians. It also means that Parliament, which is supposed to have an oversight over the president, will no longer have an oversight over the president because the president and his friends might be bribing that Parliament. You must also remember that the Zimbabwean people have always elected their president and parliament, but they've always given more votes to their parliamentarians more than the president. So Zimbabweans have got a custom and practice of electing their own president, and oftentimes they do not like the president as much as they like their what? Their parliamentarians. This is something we cannot ignore. Zimbabweans know who they want, and they oftentimes trust their parliamentarians more than the president. So They need to continue choosing their own president rather than for us to have a fascist system where the richest will buy the parliament to give us a president that will not be able to remove. I actually agree with this clause of extending the term limit of the president and parliament from 5 years to 7 years. Because in Zimbabwe, we have elections every 5 years. And 2.5 years of that period is spent electioneering and then fighting and bickering about the outcome of those elections. So we oftentimes don't have a government or politicians who spend enough time building the country because of this. But where I have a problem is this. According to the constitution that was written by a committee called COPEC, that was chaired by the first secretary and the president of ZANU-PF and the president of the country, Dr. Emmerson Mnangagwa, they put guidelines in that if you want to change the term limit of a president or a parliament, you need to actually undertake a referendum. The problem we're currently seeing right now is ZANU-PF is trying to say they do not need a referendum, but they can actually achieve this change through a parliamentary majority. That is not what the constitution that their own president chaired says. Another problem is that they want to ensure that this change to this term limit will be enjoyed by the current president or what we call the incumbent. And according to the constitution, an incumbent cannot enjoy a change to term limit unless, of course, they undertake a referendum. But here's the problem. So according to the reading and understanding of the Constitution, for all these things to be achieved, you need 4 referendums that will be given to Parliament at 4 separate times. You need a referendum to extend the president's term limit. You need a referendum to extend the term limit of Parliament. Then you need 2 separate referendums to allow the Parliament and the president to enjoy the changes of these term limits in this current term. All these changes need to be done before it can happen. However, when people are saying this, people who oppose this amendment and people who want this amendment to be done according to the Constitution begin to speak and begin to gather and educate their constituencies on this discussion, ZANU-PF and the government are stopping these people from having these discussions. They are arresting them, they are putting them in jail, and sometimes beating them and burning their premises. This I do not agree with, and one of the major reasons why I'm fighting with ZANU-PF. For me, the biggest threat and the most problematic request is Clause 15. The clause amends Section 212, Functions of Defense Forces, of the Constitution by deleting the words "to uphold the Constitution" and substituting them with "in accordance with the Constitution." The amendment is intended to reinforce the provisions of Section 213 and 214. This clause is the most problematic, and I'll explain why. You see, remember, when Robert Mugabe and his wife, together with the cabal that was around them, wanted to abuse the Constitution, utilizing violence of the police and threats to force themselves as a monarchy upon this nation, the military stepped in, put pressure on Robert Mugabe for him to resign. Remember that Mugabe did this while the parliament said nothing. They were sleeping. And this parliament was not even being bribed then. But we had someone to safeguard the Constitution where the parliament was not undertaking its job, and with someone to hold the executive to account where parliament was complicit with what it is that the executive was doing. What it is that is being done now with this constitutional amendment is they want to remove the responsibility from the military to uphold the Constitution and to defend the Constitution and to actually take action against external and internal threats, even if those internal threats are the executive. So this means that in future, if we had a very wealthy president or a corrupt president who continues to give tenders and deals to his friends, if he did that, Parliament would not be able to hold him accountable because they would be bought by the business people. And then if the military cannot defend the Constitution, the military would not be able to intervene because it would have no right to protect and defend the Constitution. I think many of you see where the problem is. So some people have said, I'm bitter. I didn't get a position. I've never wanted a position. In fact, I've compromised myself. Because right now, the presidency and other departments were actually debating to pay me for my work that I did on sanctions. Millions were supposed to be paid to me, But I rose up to try and speak against these constitutional changes because they impact all of us and our futures. So I'm potentially jeopardizing my right to be paid for the work I did against sanctions by speaking out against this constitutional amendment. I'm actually prejudicing myself by fighting for us to have a better constitution that will protect us. And I don't want Zanu PF to continue abusing people in a manner that could bring new sanctions.